Dear symposium organizers, dear audience, thank you very much for the invitation to have this presentation today. The title of my presentation is Fish Migrations in Inland Rivers in Norway, Why Bother? I had the love to be together with you in Prague today, but instead I'm sitting in my office and looking into my video camera. Hopefully we'll have the chance to meet in the future. Short overview of my presentation. I will give a retrospect on the topic fish migrations in regulated rivers in Norway. I will talk about why restoration of migrations is important and of current interest, and also talk about what is the knowledge need to restore fish migrations and how to improve the conditions for fish migrations in regulated rivers. I live in the eastern part of Norway and also mostly work there. We don't have any salmon. We are far away from the coast. So I will mainly focus on fish migration in these inland rivers of Norway with migrating European grayling, brown trout, and some other species. And what you see here is a important species and an important life stage to understand the fish migration in inland rivers. This is a grayling fry. But first of all, I want to say Happy World Fish Migration Day. This is an important and great day for us working with the fish migrations. And it's important that we have this day to focus on the challenges migrating fish species have in the world. And hopefully we can meet in a few years to talk more about all our successful restoration projects. First, a few words about the fishways in Norway. We have approximately 420 fishways. 87% of them are what we call classical salmon fishways or pool and weir types. In these fishways, the fish has to jump from pool to pool. And it's a type of fishways for fish with high swimming capacity. 83% for our fishways are for anadromous species like Atlantic salmon, brown trout, and Arctic char. And approximately 25%, or about 100, are constructed in connection with hydropower dams. In Norway, many fishways are constructed in order to increase the available river section for Atlantic salmon. They are constructed in natural waterfalls or in natural migration barriers. But today I will focus on the fishways in connection with the hydropower dams. Most of the hydropower dams in Norway has fishways, and that's a good thing. However, we have a lot of challenges. We see that the downstream migration is not safeguarded. And in general, I can say that we lack data on efficiency, functionality, selectivity, and delay of the fishways, both upstream and downstream fishways. And also a main problem is that the discharge in the fish passages often are less than 0.5% of the water flow in the river. This means that effective downstream migration is difficult, and also we lack the attraction to the entrance area of the fishways. I have worked with fish migrations and fish management in approximately 25 years, and I can see that fish migrations in these inland rivers have been on the agenda for decades. Especially these large rivers, we see that the large-scale migrations of, for example, European grayling and brown trout were described prior to the construction of the hydropower dams. but we can see that this migrating part of the populations have really reduced in numbers. And we had decades with idle discussions about how critical is it to preserve or restore the migrations of grayling and trout, because we find the vital habitats of grayling and trout between the hydropower dams. For example, in the Glomma River, it's the largest river in Norway, approximately 500 kilometers long. We have 12 hydropower dams, and we will find the vital habitats for grayling between the dams in the river. But as I will tell you today, new research has shown that if we consider migrations of grayling in a lifespan perspective, and we see that functional fishways are important to maintain fish production, viable fish populations, and the life history variation of all these species. Why is the restoration of migrations important and of current interest? Let's have a look at the society. It's in Norway, we have a political goal to increase the production of renewable energy. This includes also hydropower. At the same time, we have ambitious environmental goals for our water bodies. We have also implemented the EU's Water Framework Directive in Norway. So, and we also see that we have a lot of new plans. We have plans for new hydropower and also rehabilitation and expansion of existing installations. So this goal to increase the production of renewable energy and at the same time have ambitious environmental goals for our rivers and lakes, it is a challenge. We also see that the EU Water Framework Directive and change focus in the management. Before, not more than 10 years ago, fish stocking was the most important mitigation measures in regulated rivers in Norway, especially stocking of brown trout in these inland rivers. But now the goal is more to have natural production and spawning in the free. So this means that the focus in the management has really changed. So if you look at fish migrations, why do they migrate? And of course, it's adaptations that allow the fish to utilize several aquatic habitats to optimize survival, growth, and reproduction. This means that they can obtain greater net benefits and thus lifetime output their life. So it's quite simple. So if you have human actions that reduce or prevent fish migrations, they are expected to cause reduced fitness and declining populations. So I talked about these idle discussions, how important is it? But now I think we have had enough talking and it's time for action, and it's really time in Norway too to improve our fish passages. A few words about knowledge needs. It's very important to understand the driving forces for fish migrations. When you are planning restoration projects, you should really understand the driving forces for the fish migrations. And of course, effective two-way fish passages are very important, but knowledge on how hydropower production alter the driving forces for migration is also important. For example, we have a lot of river reservoirs. This was previously a fast-flowing river with spawning habitats for salmonids, and it was dominated by grayling and trout. Now it's more like a lake, no spawning of trout and grayling, and it's dominated by species like perch, roach, whitefish, and northern pike. We also know that migrating fish may go into the turbines, and it will also cause high mortality of migrating fish. And in many river sections, we have also reduced the water flow due to water abstraction. And this also, of course, consequences for both migration and spawning in these river sections. And the change of the fish community in for example, the reservoirs can cause a much higher predation rate on the migrating fish. This is one pike actually captured in its reservoir, and we found 5 brown trout in the stomach of this pike. A few words about working in these large rivers. You can feel small and sometimes lonely working in these large rivers, and it's not that easy to know which methods can we use to monitor the fish populations and also the fish migrations. It's working in these rivers are resource demanding. 10 years ago, we invested in an electrofishing boat. It has given us a lot of new knowledge about the fish populations in the large rivers. We have also used automatic fish counters in the fishways to monitor fish migrations. It has also been an important source of knowledge. But we also use a lot of time talking with fishermen. They have also a lot of knowledge. It's important to know about if you shall plan for mitigation measures, restoration projects, or also sometimes if you are going to assess the consequences of new hydropower dams. And you have to be creative. This is what we call the ladder method. This guy is actually observing about 40 spawning brown trout in the river Lågen. We have used a lot of genetic methods to look at the gene flow between the different river sections, and also to investigate if waterfalls are barriers or not. And in the last 3 to 4 years, we also have started to use a lot of drone to film and monitor the spawning areas in some of the rivers. This is actually large trout in the downstream power plant not far from my office. We have carried out a lot of telemetry studies. And one reason is that it was planned. They had planned to build actually new hydropower dams, and then it's very important to look at the fish migrations between past the dam area, and also to find the spawning areas and the important vital habitats for the fish species. So we have radio tagged approximately 400 adults of grayling and trouts. What we see is that if you look at the cumulative distribution of the home ranges of individual fish, we see that the migration system are quite similar in the 2 rivers we have worked in River Lågen and River Glomma. And we see that the European grayling have larger home ranges, home areas than the trout. We can have a look at the table, and we see that followed the fish in approximately 1 year, and we saw that adults of grayling, about 1/3 of them had home ranges larger than 10 kilometers. Yes, 10 kilometers. And about 10% of the brown trout had larger home ranges than 10 kilometers. So we see that the grayling actually use larger areas during a year than brown trout on average. And one important reason is that the grayling have to migrate to overwintering areas. They often use very slow-flowing parts of the river during the winter, and we see that this is an important explanation of the grayling migrations. When we have these telemetry studies, we also found the important spawning areas for the grayling. This is a typical spawning area. They spawn in the spring, and the discharge, the water flow is often quite high, and we often find the spawning areas in backwaters like this. But what we also observed that this was a very important spawning area, but we didn't find grayling fry or juveniles of grayling in these river sections. And we wanted to investigate it, and we used this electrofishing boat. And we observed that in this river system, although we had important spawning areas in both the Otta River and far up in the Lågen River, we found that the density of the yearlings and juveniles of grayling was very low. But when we moved further to the more slow-flowing parts of the rivers, we saw that we observed that the densities of the grayling juveniles were much higher. So an important explanation was that the grayling were drifting from the spawning areas and occupied more slow-flowing parts of the river downstream the spawning areas. And actually they could drift for tens of kilometers and maybe up to 50-60 kilometers before they occupied a good juvenile habitat. And that's maybe a very important driving force for the fish migrations, because the juveniles, they occupy these good habitats, and then later in their life they had to compensate for this downstream drift, and they started to migrate upstream again. They were quite small, as you can see. And we did these investigations in 10 days. Or in 2 years, and we observed that we had a drift period of approximately 10 days every year. So the grayling, when they emerged from the gravel, they were drifting downstream. And this is an example that it's very important. Maybe that's the most important driving force for the migrations we observe in the grayling. If you have a look at a schematic grayling river, we can imagine that we have some spawning areas, and that the fry drift from the spawning areas and occupied good juvenile habitats downstream these spawning areas. And we can see that if we build a dam and make a reservoir, if you make a reservoir, you will destroy the spawning habitat for the grayling. And then you will also stop the drift of the grayling to the good juvenile habitats downstream the reservoir, and then you actually will not produce grayling in this area anymore. So this has a lot of implications for management. Of course, we shall still focus on the dams and the entrance to the fishway and the functionality of the fishway. But it's also important to realize that we have changed the system, and maybe we have stopped the drift of grayling downstream when passing the dam, and maybe that's also an important reason that the fish migrations of grayling has reduced. So how shall we improve the fishways? Of course, one solution is to remove dams. And I know that in many countries they have removed a lot of dams, also quite large hydropower dams. In Norway, we haven't done that, and I don't think it's time for that yet. Hopefully, maybe in the future, we will remove some of the most damaging hydropower dams too, but it has not been done until now. So it's important to have a look at the fishways and how we can improve the fishways we already have. In the inland rivers, more than 90% of the fishways are so-called pool and weir or Denil types. This is fishways that require very high swimming capacity. And this is not optimal for species like grayling, trout, and whitefish. So we can say that we have a lot of salmon fishways in the inland rivers. We don't have salmon, and if we shall facilitate for fish migrations for species like grayling, trout, and whitefish, we should have other types of fishways. So we see also that telemetry studies have revealed that grayling migrations, we have a lot of grayling migrations in the river at very low water temperatures in early spring. You know that because the European grayling is a spring spawner, but we also observed that very few individuals pass the fishways before the spawning, and probably we observe a temperature-dependent functionality of the fishways, and that at low temperatures they are not able to pass the fishways, but they can manage to do it at higher temperatures later in the summer. In the SafePass project, we have looked at is it possible to reconstruct these existing pool and weir fishways to a kind of a vertical slot fishway, because we know that vertical slot fishways are better for fish with low swimming capacity and then these pool and weir types. I will tell you about one reconstruction work we have done, and actually we had some delegation from Czechia some years ago. It was colleagues from the Water Research Institute and Jiri Musil. So if you are there today, Jiri, hello. Hope to see you soon. But what we do, we have actually in this fishway we constructed a new. We modified the fishway from a pool and weir fishway to a vertical slot fishway. And we sawed in the concrete 30 centimeter width to the bottom of the fishway, and we filled the fishway with gravel and rocks. And after the reconstruction, it was possible to swim through the fishway, and the fish didn't have to jump from pool to pool. What we observed was that we had a small increase in the number of passing brown trout, approximately 40% increase. We observed an increase of the passage of grayling of approximately 100%. It's important to mention that it's a lot of annual variation in the migrations, so this is not enough to really say that yes, we have it's because of the reconstruction. So we need more years with the monitoring before we can say that that the reconstruction has been a success. But what we also observed was that whitefish, a species with lower swimming capacity than grayling and brown trout, increased by approximately 1,700%. So that's because the fishway was more suitable for a fish with lower swimming capacity after the reconstruction than before. We also observed new species never observed in the fish species, like burbot and pike, also passed the fishway. So quite promising results, and it should be considered to do that kind of modification in other fishways too. And we also, just to give you an example of how automatic fish counters can give you new knowledge, and we can also do some simple tests and measures to improve the fish, the conditions for fish migrations. I know that the Water Research Institute in Prague and Jiri Mosil also use these fish counters from WAKI. And we also monitor the fish migrations before with the physical traps in the fishways, but this is much better because the fish can pass the fishway without being trapped and without handling. And I think that's the way we should monitor fish migrations. And we also have the exact time for when the fish pass the fishway. And just show you one example. This is a quite simple dam. You have two spillways, and you have the entrance of the fishway here. And before they used this spillway on the other side of the river, and we saw that when we used this spillway, and we used this spillway 5 days, this spillway 5 days, and changed it during several seasons, we observed that 3.5 times more fish passed the fishway when Spillgate 1 was used. So this is one example that spillway, how we use the spillway actually can mean something about the efficiency of the fishways. So some conclusions. The migration systems in inland rivers are complex, and it's important to have knowledge about how hydropower production and other pressures have changed the driving forces for migrations, and also have knowledge about the spatial distribution of vital habitats. An important take-home message is that talking about fish migrations, for example, grayling migrations, it's important that we consider these migrations in a lifetime perspective of the fish. It should include the fry and juveniles and also the adults. So although fish species may survive between the dams, it's important to restore connectivity in regulated rivers to ensure the exchange of genes and it will also make it's possible for the fish to utilize the habitat heterogeneity in the rivers. Sometimes simple measures can improve the functionality of the fishway, for example, through spillway operation, the use of attraction water, and quite simple modification of fishways. But I think often costly reconstruction is needed to restore the fish migrations. So thank you very much and keep on the good work. Thank you.